27 family members. Dead. Not from disease, not from war, not from accident. Every single one murdered by the same hand. The hand that was supposed to protect them. And here's the most disturbing part. It wasn't done in a fit of rage or moment of madness. Each death was calculated, planned, executed with the precision of a chess grandmaster removing pieces from the board. The killer didn't just get away with it. He was celebrated. Statues built in his honor. Songs written about his greatness. For 37 years after the murders, he ruled with absolute power, dying peacefully in his bed at the age of 72. You're probably thinking this is impossible. How could someone murder their entire family and not only escape justice but thrive? But wait until you hear who was helping him, because the truth about this story involves a conspiracy so deep, so shocking, that when historians finally uncovered the evidence, they couldn't believe what they were reading. The murder started when he was just 16 years old. The first victim? His own brother. But that was just the beginning. This is Sultan Mahmud III. And what I'm about to tell you isn't just the story of a murderer. It's the story of a system so brutal, so calculated, that it turned family killing into government policy. Welcome to the insane true story of the Ottoman Empire's most ruthless tradition. You see, Mehmed wasn't born evil. In fact, for the first 16 years of his life, he was known for his poetry, his love of art, and his gentle demeanor. Born in 1566 in the Manisa Palace, he was the son of Sultan Murad III and Safiya Sultan. But here's the crucial part. He was one of 20 sons 20. And in the Ottoman Empire, that wasn't a blessing. It was a death sentence for 19 of them. Mehmed would later reflect on his childhood and describe it as living in a golden cage with wolves. It was an early lesson for Mehmed that in his world, family meant competition, and competition meant death. The Ottoman system had a name for what was coming. Fratricide. The law of fratricide. Sounds formal, doesn't it? Almost clinical. But what it really meant was this. When a new sultan took the throne, he was not just permitted, but expected to murder all his brothers. Every single one. The logic was brutally simple. Eliminate any possibility of civil war. No brothers meant no rival claims to the throne. No civil wars meant a stable empire. The math was cold, but effective. Mehmed watched his father Murad III wrestle with this tradition when he became sultan. Murad had executed 5 brothers on his first day as ruler. Mehmed was just a child when he watched his father return from the executions, saw the weight in his eyes, the way his hands trembled as he signed the death warrants. Power demands sacrifice, his father told him that night. But the sacrifice is never yours alone to bear. But here's what made Mehmed different from previous sultans. He didn't just accept this system, he studied it. While his brothers spent their time in the palace pursuing pleasures and plotting against each other, Mehmed spent his time in the library, reading every account of succession crises, every civil war, every challenge to Ottoman power. He realized something that would shape his entire approach to power. The system wasn't brutal enough. You see, the traditional law only called for killing brothers, but Mehmed saw that wasn't sufficient. Uncles, cousins, nephews, any male with even a drop of Ottoman blood could potentially challenge the throne. The truth is, Mehmed understood something his predecessors had missed. In the game of absolute power, there are no partial victories. You either eliminate all threats, or you live forever looking over your shoulder. In 1595, Sultan Murad III died, and suddenly, 29-year-old Mehmed's theoretical understanding of power became terrifyingly practical. But Mehmed saw an opportunity here that others had missed. He wasn't the eldest son, nor was he the most popular. 3 of his brothers were older, stronger, with better connections in the military. By all conventional thinking, Mehmed should have been one of the victims, not the victor. Using these new calculations, Mehmed began his rise not with force, but with cunning. He cultivated relationships with the Janissaries, the elite military unit that effectively controlled Istanbul. But here's the brilliant part. He didn't promise them gold or land like his brothers did. He promised them something far more valuable: stability. "Choose me," he told their leaders, "and the succession will be swift, decisive, and final. No prolonged civil war, no uncertainty. One day of blood for decades of peace." The Janissaries were tired of succession crises that disrupted their power and payment. In many ways, it was such an incredibly simple move, but it was the meticulous planning that made it possible. While his brothers made grand promises, Mehmed made a single, terrible, credible one. He would be the most thorough sultan in Ottoman history. No half measures, no mercy, no exceptions. On January 27th, 1595, the moment his father's death was announced, Mehmed's plan went into action. The palace gates were sealed. Nobody in, nobody out. His brothers were told their father wanted to see them for a final blessing. One by one, they entered what they thought was their father's death chamber. One by one, they met the silk bowstring instead, the traditional method of Ottoman execution for royalty. Bloodless, they called it. As if that somehow made it more civilized. But here's the crucial part that history books often skip. Mehmed didn't stop with his 19 brothers. What most people didn't realize was that Mehmed had been keeping detailed records. Every male relative, every potential claim to the throne, every drop of Ottoman blood that could one day challenge his rule. The list had 27 names on it, ages ranging from 40 years old to just 3 months. That's right, 3 months old. The youngest victim was his nephew, his eldest brother's son, barely old enough to hold his own head up. The Ottoman archives record that the child was still nursing when the executioners arrived. The wet nurse tried to protest, but Mehmed had thought of everything she was told she could either hand over the child or join him in death. She chose to live. The child did not. But wait, there's more to this story. Because Mehmed didn't just kill them. He made it legal. Official. He had the Sheikhul Islam, the highest religious authority in the empire, issue a fatwa declaring these executions not just permissible, but necessary for the good of the Islamic world. Think about that for a second. He got religious approval for killing babies. The fatwa read, "It is permissible for the Sultan to kill his brothers for the sake of the order of the world." The order of the world. That's how they justified murdering children. Mehmed now had everything: absolute power, religious authority, military support. And boy, did he enjoy that power. The Ottoman Empire at this time controlled territory from Budapest to Baghdad, from Crimea to Cairo. 3 continents, 40 million subjects. Annual revenue equivalent to $2 billion in today's money. This is very different to how we think of power today. Mehmed could, and did, order the execution of anyone who displeased him. He once had a group of women drowned in the Bosphorus because he was bored of them. He had his own son executed because he suspected disloyalty. The Ottoman palace under Mehmed became a place of absolute terror and absolute luxury. He maintained a harem of over 300 women. He commissioned the famous Blue Mosque, one of Istanbul's most iconic landmarks, built with the blood money of an empire built on fratricide. Here's what's really interesting though. Mehmed was actually an effective ruler. The empire remained stable. The borders secure. Trade flourished. The murder of 27 family members had, from a purely pragmatic standpoint, worked exactly as intended. No civil wars, no succession crises, no challenges to his authority. For 37 years, Mehmed III ruled unchallenged. The graves of his family, the foundation of his throne. The problem was, Mehmed had created a precedent that would haunt the Ottoman Empire for centuries. But the bloodshed didn't stop there. You see, once you normalize killing family for power, where exactly do you draw the line? Mehmed's own sons began plotting against each other while he was still alive, each knowing that when their father died, all but one would follow him to the grave. The paranoia was consuming the palace from within. But here's where Mehmed's calculation began to fail. The very thoroughness that secured his power also began to undermine it. By killing every potential male heir except his own sons, Mehmed had actually made the empire more vulnerable, not less. If anything happened to him and his sons, there would be nobody left. The Ottoman bloodline, which had ruled for 300 years, was hanging by a thread. Little did Mehmed know, but his own health was beginning to fail. Years of indulgence, paranoia, and the weight of 27 murders were taking their toll. He became increasingly erratic, convinced that everyone was plotting against him, which, to be fair, they probably were. When you rule through fear, fear becomes the only currency that matters. The economy began to stagnate as Mehmed became more focused on internal threats than external governance. The military, once the pride of the empire, grew restless and underpaid rebellions began sprouting in the provinces. The very stability Mehmed had murdered for was crumbling beneath his feet. Then in December 1603, something happened that Mehmed, for all his planning, hadn't anticipated. He died. Not from assassination, not from rebellion, but from simple natural causes. A stomach ailment, the records say, though some historians suspect poison for Mehmed. As the consequences of a lifetime of paranoia and murder finally caught up, the empire held its breath. Who would succeed him? His son Ahmed was only 13 years old, barely old enough to grow a beard, let alone rule an empire. And here's the ironic twist. Ahmed, who had grown up watching his father's brutality, who had lived every day knowing he might be next, refused to follow the tradition. When Ahmed I took the throne, he made a decision that shocked everyone. He didn't kill his brother Mustafa. For the first time in Ottoman history, a sultan allowed his brother to live. The tradition of fratricide, which Mehmed had taken to its absolute extreme, died with him. Future sultans would find other ways to deal with succession. Imprisonment rather than execution, systems of seniority rather than slaughter. Mehmed had been so thorough, so brutal, that he actually broke the system he was trying to preserve. As for Mehmed himself, he was buried in the Hagia Sophia, one of the greatest architectural achievements in human history. Buried with full honors, his murders not just forgiven, but celebrated as necessary evils. The inscription on his tomb reads, Sultan Mehmed III, Shadow of God on earth. Shadow of God. That's how he saw himself. That's how he wanted to be remembered. Ultimately, though, the people who suffered most were not just the 27 family members Mehmed murdered, but the entire Ottoman Empire. What is clear is this system of institutionalized fratricide was an example of how power can corrupt not just individuals, but entire civilizations. The Ottoman Empire never fully recovered from the precedent Mehmed set. The paranoia, the brutality, the normalization of family murder. It all contributed to the empire's eventual decline, and full reports suggest that towards the end, Mehmed had gone from a poetry-loving young prince to a paranoid monster who trusted no one, loved no one, and was loved by no one. He died alone, surrounded by servants too terrified to speak, in a palace built on the bones of his brothers. The Ottoman Empire would limp on for another 300 years, but the damage was done. The tradition of fratricide had destroyed the very concept of family loyalty that held societies together. When you make murder a tool of governance, you can't be surprised when governance becomes nothing but murder. Modern historians study Mehmed's reign as a cautionary tale about the price of absolute power. But here's what they often miss. Mehmed wasn't an aberration. He was the logical conclusion of a system that valued power over humanity. When you create rules that demand brutality, you shouldn't be surprised when someone follows them to their absolute extreme. The Blue Mosque still stands in Istanbul today, its beautiful minarets reaching toward heaven. Tourists take photos, admiring its architecture, mostly unaware that it was built by a man who murdered 27 family members, including infant children, to secure his throne. That's the thing about history. The monuments remain, but the blood gets washed away. Now, whilst the story of Sultan Mehmed III is pretty horrifying, I still wouldn't call him the most ruthless ruler in history. For that, you're going to want to check out the absolutely insane story of Emperor Qin Shi Huang, a man who buried 460 scholars alive just for disagreeing with him, and that was on a good day. His body count makes Mehmed look merciful. But that's a story for another video. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.